Okay. All right. Welcome. Day 2. Anybody else worn out? Anybody else a large fraction of the way to worn out? Matthew? See me after. We'll talk. I'll find out how you do that. I had originally, when I started thinking about this, and when my boss said, hey, this is a great idea, you really ought to present about that, because gosh, you do this so well. I actually had been watching Disney's The Princess and the Frog. How many of you have seen the film? Right, I had to play the song for my boss because he had not seen it yet. But the wonderful song, Friends on the Other Side. I thought briefly about rearranging the lyrics a little so that it fit with this talk and singing the first verse of that. But me singing in bass is such a scary thing. I just was not going to go there. And although I can imitate Peter David's voice quite well, that's not going to happen today. I'm sorry. Say what you're thinking, Brian. Okay. It's a wonderful tune. I did find out yesterday afternoon that my dog misses me a lot. He's down in northeastern Georgia, missing his mama a lot. This is Henry, the hound dog, and he's a bit lonely. We do have some goals for today. Now, how many of you have never used DBIx beyond very small experiments? Okay, that's fair. I'm going to skip over something that you will probably want at some point, and that is the very basics. All right. This is kind of a sophomore level. This is a 201 class, not a 100 class. Clear enough? All right. We have some goals. So we're going to learn a little bit about wrangling DateTime objects. Because compatibility. You have different databases. They behave differently with different kinds of dates and times, and they have different functions built into them. And DBIx class, fortunately, will help you do that smoothly if you choose to do so. We're going to learn a little about using your database's functions directly from within DBIx class. See an example of using results from one search as feed for another search. Learn a little bit about custom result methods and ResultSet class methods. Discover some useful helpers and learn some strategies for making your database functionality friendlier and more maintainable. Talk about both. And that's really talking about two things, not one. Because friendly and maintainable don't always go together well, as we have found out at Clearbuilt. There are some non-goals. Database design and implementation, I'm not going to talk about that much. Presumably, if you're here, you know that a good well-linked database, 2NF or 3NF, is probably a good thing. And you're not doing really insane things where you have one giant table and it has your customer data and every order they've ever made in the same table. Something like that. You know that orders need to be their own table and you link them back to the customer in some way. You know that stuff. We're not going to talk about that. The basics of DBIx class. I'm hoping you've at least seen what a basic search looks like. If you have not, look at MetaCPen, DBIx class manual, which has a slightly gentle introduction. Not as gentle as the introduction to Dancer, but a gentle-ish introduction to DBIx class. We're not going to talk about integrating DBIx work into Dancer, Mojo, or anything else. We're going to work straight from DBIx class. In Dancer 2, there's a plugin for that. It makes it a lot easier. Turns a lot of these things into Dancer keywords so you can skip a step or two. That's the core of it. Date and times. You know, it's funny because intuitively you have this object that's got this whole mess of variables in there for the year and the month and the day and the minutes and the seconds and the fractions of seconds and which time zone and all this stuff and a whole host of methods. And so you think, okay, well, my database wants a string formatted thusly. And so it may seem intuitive to you to say, well, I'm going to take my date time string and parse it out some way and then send it. The good news is that for update and create operations, You do not need to do that. In most cases, there are a handful of databases where this is not true. But MySQL, Postgres, Oracle, SQLite, it is true. Result, update, send it your data object. Done. It will stringify correctly and work. It's built in. It's already baked into DBIx class. I get it. I didn't learn this until about 3 weeks ago. Surprise! What operation is not here? Search, yes. For searches, however, you do need to stringify it yourself. There's a couple of ways to do it. Here's one. You can use DateTime strftime to output it in the format that your database is expecting, and then, there it is. Or you can do, what? Why are we showing two things at once? Or you can use a DateTime formatter, which you can ask DBIx class to give me the formatter that you will use for update and create, and use that to format the DateTime. That's what I usually would like to use. I think that's the cleanest and smoothest. And then what you can do is your DTF object there, here at the top, don't scope that at a subroutine level. You might scope that at a package level so that you have it in all the subroutines in that package. And then you don't have to make a bunch of copies of it. Just scope that at your package level, and then you've got it. I would not scope that at the huge application level, but this is one of those cases where a package level scope makes a little bit of sense, so you don't have to recreate the thing over and over and over. All right, so that's the first one, and we're done. Calling database functions on the right-hand side of a select. Okay. I'm going to talk about the right-hand side, and then I'll talk about the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, you can just do stuff like right here. You can say select length of the name as... So I'm going to search all artists because I have a null search here, which is going to bring me the whole table. And I just want the name and the length of the name. And I want them returned to me in objects as name and name length. Most database functions for most databases can be called in this way. Very simple. So the common things you're going to use: sum, length, concat, extract year, extract month, extract date in Postgres. Those kinds of easy functions where you're going to give it as a parameter a column. There you go. Super easy. Question, Chad?
Does this result return them as less objects?
Yes. The object that is returned from this search, in this case, is a result set, a DBIx class result set that is a collection of DBIx class rows that have only two fields in them. Yes. And so anything you can do with a result set, you can do with this. You can further narrow that search, for instance, by doing another search against it.
But this doesn't return arts objects.
No. Here's another one. This should look a little familiar, Neil. I'm going to search all fabric roles, and I'm going to select their lot and the sum, which is how many kilograms of each of these fabric lots do we have. Presumably, I'm going to put this in a report. The equivalent SQL. Select lot as lot, sum quality kilograms as total weight, from fabric roll, group by lot. Done. Using the single format database functions on the right-hand side is that easy. Just knock yourself out. Here's another example. Now this one, I'm going to pick things from a couple of tables. I have a group of warehouses, and each one of them has a name, and within each warehouse there's a bunch of fabric rolls. So for all warehouses, select the name, the lot, and the count of rolls in that name, in that lot, in that warehouse. Group by warehouse and then lot. So you'll get warehouse lot, number of roles, warehouse lot, number of roles. You just need to join your fabric roles. You don't get that for free. Just tell it to make sure to join that second piece, and you got it. And this will do a simple left join, very straightforward. And this is really, really readable, right?
That's what the column names match.
In this case, they do. But you could put anything you wanted, really, in the as clause. Now, this is not doing a SQL select me name as name. It's doing select me name and then creating the object, and it has name as an accessor. They happen to be the same thing in this case. But it's not doing a SQL as here. You can do a SQL as. I do that so rarely, don't need to. Okay? We want to now select distinct. How many of you do select distincts very often? Oh yeah, we do that kind of thing all the time. So show me all the lots of fabric roles. Select distinct lot as lot, or the alternative is to use the distinct as a parameter down here. And just distinct is true. Any truthy value there will give you the distinct clause in the produced SQL that's being generated by SQL Abstract underneath the hood. Okay, I'm feeling really good because I keep seeing Matthew nodding. And that's a good thing because I know he is not a DBIx class fan. He likes just doing, DBI do, kinda. But I get it. But I like the fact that I'm seeing nodding faces. Anybody else lost? Okay, have I completely lost anybody? Just checking. Good time to. Now or current timestamp. Those are something you use a lot when you're updating a table, for instance. In this case, you want to use literal SQL for some reason. If you need literal SQL in the right-hand side, because you have a complex thing, like a union, like a coalesce statement, you can do that, backslant, quote, your literal SQL, right-hand quote. Now, if you need parameters in that, it gets a little harder. But this will parse as the bottom one here for the form row that you have in hand. Update it. Set ship date equals now. And you just escape the open quote, but not the close quote. Isn't that crazy?
It is crazy.
It messes with my brain, and it used to mess with my editor all the time. Because you escape the open, but not the close. What on earth? But it just works. Yeah, it's a reference. It's not escaping. It's a reference to a string. It's a reference to a scalar. Yeah, it's a reference to an anonymous scalar. Oh, yeah, that's what I eventually had to figure it out. Yeah.
Make your editor make peace with that.
What?
Make your editor make peace with that.
I had been using a Vim plugin that was a little stale and out of date and really kind of designed for very, very basic Perl and was not DBIx class smart. And that was what was barking, was when I looked at that. It was highlighting wrong. So it would switch to an in quote highlight length here in the middle of a string and stay that way for the rest of the file. And that was annoying. And then when I switched to VS Code with Perl Navigator, which is magic. No, I didn't produce it, but I love it. It just fixed that. No problem.
But it is just a scalar reference. So
Yeah, it's a scalar reference. Yep. Yep.
I will do.
Yeah, you can do that either way. Okay, so what if you need to put left-hand side literal SQL or database functions? For instance, I'm going to select from a result set of nerds where the year joined is some year that a user has entered on the form. Just like this. You're going to make a bind clause. This is very similar to in DBI. You want to do a bind. You're going to create a bindable clause and tell it what you want. And if you need to have other search parameters in there, for instance, static things like in the bottom case here, favorite language is Perl, you just AND that together. Yep.
So you're using a reference to an array reference as a hash key without a value?
Yeah. That's what it looks like, right? I tell you what, you want to,
I mean, I think what I'm asking is the hash reference in search actually intended to be there? Because you are using a reference, so you basically got a memory address that you're passing in as a hash key.
yeah, I don't know. 12-word horror story. Open the hood and look at the source of DBIx class. It really, it is Voodoo.
That should even produce a warning. Perl should.
It just works.
Yep. Yes, but it's using it as a hash key without a value. Like, that's an uneven list being assigned to a hash. You'd think that would be a warning.
You would think. I would too, but it works. But it works. I haven't a clue of it. All right. But yeah, you could create hazards with this, but I mean, I would go at this a different way. Probably, I would probably do a like clause rather than something else, rather than this. But this was an example that I bumped into and adapted slightly. But this is what you do. I tell you what, you want to see some other crazy stuff? DBIx class manual cookbook has got a whole lot of how do I do this nutty thing, including this, and make it work. And it's one of those that you'll probably put on your bookmarks list and keep linked so that you can go back to it when you go, I need to do this crazy thing. Because you know this is wonky syntax, but it works. Thank you. Right, it abuses Perl syntax. Whoop, wrong button. This happened last week. This came up. I had done this once before. My boss wanted to do this again, didn't know how to, and I showed it to him and he went, wow, that's cool. You ought to talk about it at the presentation. You're welcome, boss. Here it is. So I have a bunch of car titles in a file at a place that handles lending for cars. And I'm going to audit them and make sure that I have all the ones I'm supposed to have for the cars that I currently have notes on. So I'm going to search some things in both of those. And missing is search title ID, not in. And here's the trickery. Found get column title ID as query. As query then turns this into these three statements become select from title where title ID, not in, open parentheses, select title ID from audit.
But did it run the first statements first?
Yep. So you have objects. You have ResultSet objects.
So then it's gone to the database 3 times.
It's going to do 3 quick searches. Yeah. Sometimes you gotta. Sometimes it would be nice to lighten that load. And you can, make that wordier if you want to. Yep.
Actually, it doesn't go to the database 3 times.
It's going to.
Search, but it does not actually hit the database and evaluate the search until you ask for the result.
Until you ask for a result value. Now, if you did all on this, it's asking for the result value, and then it does it then. This is going to prepare the search, and then it'll collate it when you actually try to output missing.
So that's actually very interesting. So when I diagnose or debug or otherwise do performance stuff or your performance notes, these all run instantly like that.
Yeah, these are all pretty light until you try to access what's in missing.
Right. And only then is the expensive network access.
Right. Excuse me. Custom result methods. Now this is really nice because a lot of times you have something about a result row, a single object, that you want to calculate on the fly. You don't want to store that in a database for whatever reason. Okay, so you're dealing with people, for instance, in this case users, and you have them in first name, last name in 2 different fields. You might have first name, last name, suffix. You might have first name, middle name, last name. Who knows, right? Depending on where you are in the world and what your functionality is. but you want a way to print out their whole name. So a custom result method here makes that really easy, because then you can just do, you've got a dollar user and it's got an object that's a single row that you've searched up somewhere. You can just do user arrow full name. You got it. Easy, right? You can even do some fancy math and whatever you want with that. Here's another one. We have a customer and we want to know how much money they've spent on us. So we look at them, their orders, grab all the totals of the orders, and sum them. How much have they spent with us? This customer doesn't spend any money with us. We don't need to deal with them very much. Whatever. You can get these kinds of things really fast. And the nice thing is, if you ever change how that wants to work, like, oh gosh, let's change that so it only tells me how much they've spent in the last 18 months. You put something between orders and get column, a search statement that narrows it down, you're done. Fast, easy maintenance. Now doing this at ResultSet level, a little different breed of cat. Usually you're going to be doing a search of some kind that you do fairly often. And in this case, this is something we do all the time. So this shows up in practically every one of our repositories. And if I come across a repository that's got a Boolean like this, and it doesn't have it, I put it in there because I know we're going to use it over and over and over and over again. So then you just do search, result set, fabric role, active, and then whatever other searches you may want to do, and then outputting as appropriate. You don't have to do this. Now, I'm going to talk about another way to do this in a minute. Here's one, for instance. If you have some complicated search, like I want all the fabric rolls that were knitted in the last 6 weeks that are blue that were made for this customer. And you're going to send it in as parameters, perhaps. Put that in a ResultSet method if you're going to use it more than once or twice, because that way, if you change that weird logic, you only have to change it one place for fabric roll. Nice and handy. My team is all nodding because they have learned this by doing, and it's wonderful. Let's talk about helpers. Helpers, there's a ton of them available on CPAN. There's a lot. Some of them will have my byline on them. Look for Geek Ruth. They're fairly easy to write. I say easy-ish because I spent several hours wrangling one over the weekend. Many of them are nothing more or less than syntactic sugar around a more complicated search that you might be doing a bunch of times. They sweeten the syntax. Here I've used several helpers in a row. This is select from artist where publisher is null, order by last name, return it as a hash ref, and I want all records. Instead of that. This is tidier syntax. It's easy to read. As long as these helpers are well named, well nominated, then it makes it easy to read and you know what they're doing. So let's see some examples. All right, Fru, Axel Schmidt did this fantastic. This isn't even all of them. If I put all of them on the screen, it's tiny, tiny print. And I really did not want Matthew sitting halfway back going, "What's that, Ruthie?" So I put only the common ones, lots of ones that I have used and that my team has used grepping our code bases. All right. And a lot of them are really simple things like return rows. How many rows do I want? 10. Okay, give me 10 rows. I want rand. This is great for testing. Send me 10 random rows out of my database. Column or columns that are null or not null, or I can distinct by, I can do unions and intersections. I can do like and not like searches very, very quickly this way. Here's another set. This is ones where if you have a Boolean column in your data and you activate this helper, then you get active and not active free. You don't have to type that in. You don't have to create that result method anymore. Done for Boolean methods. Just trigger it. Just load the helper. You got it for all your Boolean methods. Whatever the name of your column is, you get that for it true and not that for it false. Pretty slick. Result set names. This is partly a Matt Trout creation and partly mine. I wanted it for Dancer, but it needed something under the hood. So instead of this, then you type this. It turns all of your result set names into accessors on the schema. So, yeah, you just type schema, author, search, do stuff. And if you have DBIx class helpers engaged and you have Dancer2 plugin DBIx class result set names, it turns author into a keyword in Dancer. Oh, I wasn't going to talk about that stuff, was I? Sorry. Not. I did this one last year. It was released just about conference time last year. Temporal Relations. We do a lot of things with when did somebody, show me the first one of these that this person did. Show me things done before this time. Show me things done after this time. So if you create the linkage and you say, here's a verb, and here's the column that gives the date that is associated with that verb, then you get a whole bunch of nice new methods. First one, last one, most recent post written before, most recent post written between. You can just get all kinds of goodies. That one's kind of fun. I had a ball with that. It is currently failing tests on 538 because one of the inflection modules under the hood is failing tests. So I'm trying to figure out how to do something about that. This one is dedicated to Neil Berry of Clearbuilt, who has a abiding dislike of enumerations in databases. Now, there are philosophical reasons why database enumerations are of questionable value. And in fact, I linked to some of that discussion in the CPAN page for this module. But if you've given yourself an enumeration of a text field inside DBIx class, then it's just a plain text field to the database. The database doesn't care, and DBIx class takes care of enforcement of that enumeration. If you try to feed it something that is incorrect, like if you tried to update one of your doohickeys or doodads to purple, it will throw an exception. Nope, you can't do that. That's not a valid value for this field. You can use it as a selector by using an is before it. Take the lowercase name, you got it. You can use on a singular as a result method, is this doohickey blue? Yes or no. That was kind of fun. And it lets you do enumerations that you can update and change very quickly without a schema change in your database, because it's still just a text field. You will see at the bottom of the CPAN page for this module, there is a longish roadmap of cool new things that I want to do with this, including allowing you to enumerate numeric fields. This was released on Monday, brand new module. I just released it. We needed some more helpers because we had some old data where instead of putting a null in a column where we want nothing, there's a blank, a null string, an empty string, not a database null. So blank and not blank, and blank or null and not blank or null. And I enhanced the is and is not and is any around Booleans. I went another step. You can list more than one column on an is, and they must all be true. You can list more than one column on an is not, and they must all be false. And if you use any and is any and list only one column, you get an exception. Why would you ask for is any on only one column? It actually says that. If you give it more than one, then any one of them being true will return true. 0, non-zero, positive, negative, null, or 0 for numerics, especially numerics that are nullable, that last one. Null or 0 does not always, on all databases, return 0 if you ask for 0. If it's null, some databases will return it as if it were 0. Some databases will not. This explicitly sets the case. Spider-Man said something similar, yes. Comic fans? Wasn't it, but it was said way before that. President Roosevelt. So you can give yourself some really lovely headaches. Worse, you can give your boss some really lovely headaches. And I have learned, ask me how I know, that giving your boss headaches is not really a good idea, right? We know that. We're professionals around here. We know that stuff. And I don't just say that because my boss is sitting here. So we were talking about this, 2 months ago, about have some general sort of guidelines. Standards is too strong a word for this, really. Just how do we make this easier in the general case? How do we keep from creating unnecessary headaches from this kind of simplification and modularization of the code? Because you can overdo it really easily. Ask me how I know. ResultSet methods should always return a result set. Now that's me being a little pedantic. I get it. Sometimes you want to return an array of hash refs because you want it in non-object format because you're going to feed it to a front end that doesn't handle the object well. No, do that in your business logic. In the result set, the output should always be a result set so that you can chain it with something else like a helper. Because if you don't do that, then you can't chain it. That's got to be the last thing in the line. Use helpers liberally, result set methods sparingly. Does that make sense, Neil? Does that express what you and I said in 35 minutes of talking about this that one day? Use helpers all you want to. They're great, especially the real well-named ones. Like null and is not and stuff like that. Use those liberally because they're easy to use and they work well. They're well tested. And you don't have to go and look at another piece of code. You don't have to open another file to go and find what it's doing. Result set methods, if you've got a route code for Dancer, for instance, and you've got a method in there that's calling a result set, then you've got your boss opening 2 or 3 files trying to figure out what you're doing there. And he's got a customer on the phone that's complaining about it. And the second thing he will do after that complaint is issued by the customer is growl at you about it.
What's the first thing?
Thank you, David. He will hang up the phone. You knew that was good. Chain your calls consistently. You can dangle several helpers in a row, and that's fine. But as I noted earlier, if you've got a result set method that's not returning a result set, it must be the last thing in the chain. Otherwise, anything further chaining will cause weird errors at runtime. They will compile fine, but until like if you're using Perl Navigator, it'll look fine. It's like, okay, that's a method I can call. But then when you try to run it, boom, and you've got spew in your log. Chain them consistently. My suggestion here is helpers, then your result set calls, then finally formatting and quantity output. So if you're going to do HRI for return me a hash ref of an array of hash refs, then put that down toward the end. You don't have to. SQL Abstract will fix it. And it'll do what you want, but putting that down at the end just makes things a little easier to read. Avoid nested result set methods. This is not an absolute, but it's a really good idea. Anything you chain inside your result set method that's another result set method, make sure that it is extremely well named and tightly focused. Because it is very easy, if you have 2 complicated result set methods and you attempt to chain them together, that your boss is going to growl at you at some point because you will have conflicting search inputs. Ask me how I know. I did it, and it took him a little while to figure it out. And then he's like, let's talk. This is the thing that will give your boss a headache that he will gladly pass on to you. So avoid, now the one like active that I showed earlier, that's not a problem. Why? Because it's doing one thing. It's basically a helper. And it's a helper that we just don't have there. It's doing exactly one thing, and it's very well named. Therefore, this tip, name your methods very explicitly. And I'm not saying dirty names here, really. Come on. What are you thinking? Exactly. No, name them very clearly. What does this search for? If you've got a complicated search, you can even, search for such and so report. This is my, left-handed accountant search. The one that left-handed accountant wanted for this special report. Make sure that it is clearly named so you know what it does, so that when you chain it in your route, for instance, you spend less time toggling back and forth looking at two different files. Because you know that search is, and then this is a case where even if you don't do a lot of testing, a unit test is not a bad idea. Because these things are a little brittle in that respect. Because you got to make sure that you've named them well and all of that. A unit test wrapped around that just gives you a little more comfort and surety that it's doing what you want, and you can treat it more like a helper. If you only use a method once, collapse it back into that which has called it. And I say this because, again, like I said yesterday, our head of support is also our CEO. So he gets a call from the customer because he is the client whisperer. He gets a call from our client and they're saying this isn't working, and he's immediately opening up the route and he sees there's a method in there, and so he has to open the file and he has to open the file and he has to open the file. He's chasing this thing down. Meanwhile, he's preparing a nice long growl for you. But if you only use it once, collapse it back into its caller, it just saves time on maintenance. If you use it twice, think about making it a method. If you use it 3 or more times, think harder. Unless it's something really simple and obvious and short, once you've used it 3 times, probably a good candidate for a method, especially if it is complex. Be aware of memory bloat versus multiple DB hits. You can call a search in DBIx class in an array context, and you get back an array of row objects. And depending on what you're calling, that could be really, really big. You get this fat array of 1 million objects, and whoever your sysadmin is then growling at you. Because all of a sudden, this worker for that's running this web thing goes and just chokes the system. In that kind of a case, you might want to do while ResultSet next. So you're calling them one at a time. You're doing multiple database hits there. This goes back to my talk yesterday. Think about those loops and what is the weight of one great big call that's going to grab me every record in the database versus I'm going to touch them all one at a time, which is going to have a whole bunch of database hits. Take your pick and think about that in the context of what you're doing, your developers. I can't tell you the right answer here. We have a little bit of time left, just 3-4 minutes. So quick question or two. You got any? Oh, come on. Surely some of you are lost in the mud at this point, right? No? Gosh. My work here is done then, I guess. Thank you so much for your kind attention and your attendance. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Go in peace with my best wishes for you.